special people. They're the luckiest people in the world.
At 83, Barbra Streisand no longer talks about love as something to chase. She talks about it as something to remember. To the world, she was fearless, a voice without limits, a woman who reshaped fame on her own terms. But behind that strength lived a quieter reality, a life guided by difficult choices, near misses, and men who came close to becoming home. In Rare Reflections, Barbra spoke about 6 men she could have built a life with, not as regrets, but as turning points. Each represented a different future. She briefly stood inside, before stepping away. Watch until the end, because number 3 isn't just a love story, it's the one that changed how she understood commitment, independence, and herself forever. Number 1, Elliott Gould. Their story began long before the world learned how to pronounce Barbra Streisand's name with reverence. It was the early 1960s when Barbra met Elliott Gould, a sharp-witted actor with restless energy and an instinct for humor. She was still fighting to be heard. He was already comfortable in his skin. He made me feel normal, she would later admit, a rare feeling for a woman who never quite fit into the world she was entering. They married in 1963, before fame reshaped her life. For a while, they lived like 2 young people, building something private, almost ordinary. Elliott admired her talent deeply. He encouraged her voice, her ambition, her refusal to be small. "He believed in me before anyone else did," she once said. That belief mattered more to her than romance. But success arrived unevenly. As Barbra's career soared, the distance between who she was becoming and who they had been together widened. Elliott struggled, not with loving her, but with standing beside a woman the world now watched relentlessly. Fame is a third person in a marriage, she later reflected, and it's a demanding one. They divorced in 1971 after 8 years together and the birth of their son. There was pain, but never cruelty. Unlike many loves that followed, Elliott remained tethered to her life through shared history and parenthood. "We didn't fail," she once said quietly. "We changed." Looking back, Barbra acknowledged that Elliott represented the life she might have lived. A quieter one, rooted in partnership rather than momentum. With different timing, fewer demands, and less noise, she believed they could have grown old together. Elliott Gould wasn't just her first husband. He was the life that almost stayed. Number 2, Pierre Trudeau. When Barbra Streisand met Pierre Trudeau, it wasn't romance that drew her in first. It was intellect. Their connection formed in the late 1960s and early 1970s. At a moment when Barbra was becoming an international star and Trudeau was redefining political leadership in Canada. He wasn't dazzled by celebrity, and that alone made him different. "He challenged me," she once recalled, "and I liked that." Trudeau was charismatic in a quiet, disciplined way. He listened more than he spoke, and when he spoke, he chose his words carefully. Barbra found that restraint alluring. With him, conversations stretched late into the night. About culture, responsibility, history, and the cost of public life. "He had a mind that never rested," she said. "Being with him made me want to be sharper, more thoughtful." But their worlds were built on opposite foundations. Barbra's life was emotional, expressive, fueled by creativity and feeling. Pierre's was controlled, duty-bound, shaped by political consequence. He belonged to a country. She belonged to an audience. "He lived for service," she reflected years later. "I lived for expression." The difference wasn't conflict. It was gravity pulling in 2 directions. They shared moments of closeness, even tenderness, but permanence was never truly possible. A life together would have meant sacrifice on a scale neither could honestly make. Barbra would have had to quiet herself. Pierre would have had to abandon obligation. Neither was willing, nor should they have been. Looking back, she spoke of him not as a lost love, but as a reminder that connection doesn't always seek ownership. "Some people come into your life to expand you," she said, not to stay. Pierre Trudeau represented a life of structure, discipline, and purpose, a life Barbra respected deeply but could never fully inhabit. He wasn't the man she chose. He was the life that asked her to choose herself. Number 3. John Peters. If the other men entered Barbra Streisand's life through admiration, curiosity, or timing, John Peters entered through intensity. They met in the mid-1970s, when John Peters was a powerful Hollywood producer and Barbra was at the height of her creative authority. From the beginning, their relationship burned hotter and louder than the others. John was passionate, she later admitted, about work, about control, about me. He wasn't intimidated by her success. He wanted to manage it, shape it, protect it, sometimes too fiercely. Unlike the men before him, John didn't stand beside her. He stood in front of her. Their relationship became a collision of ambition and emotion. John was impulsive, volatile, and deeply possessive. Barbra, who had spent her life fighting for creative independence, found herself slowly negotiating space she had already earned. "I felt loved," she once reflected, "but I also felt watched." Love, in this case, came with rules, unspoken but heavy. They were engaged. Marriage was discussed seriously. This was not a what if, it was almost a decision. Friends believed they would build a life together. On paper, it made sense. Power, success, shared industry, shared intensity. But privately, Barbra began to feel something tightening. "I started to disappear," she confessed years later, "and that scared me more than being alone." Ending the relationship was painful and public. John did not leave quietly, and yet, looking back, Barbra never spoke of him with bitterness, only clarity. "He taught me something important," she said, "that love should never cost you your voice." Of all the men she spoke about, John Peters represented the most dangerous possibility, not because he didn't love her, but because staying would have required surrender. He wasn't the life she almost lived. He was the life she chose not to lose herself inside. Number 4. Don Johnson. When Barbra Streisand crossed paths with Don Johnson, the connection felt lighter than what had come before, and that in itself was the attraction. This was the late 1970s, a period when Barbra was reassessing not just love, but the weight she carried into every relationship. Don was different, younger, spontaneous, and unburdened by the need to control outcomes. He moved through life with an ease that intrigued her. Don represented youth without chaos. He was confident, flirtatious, and unafraid of Barbra's stature. "He wasn't overwhelmed by me," she once noted, "he just accepted me." With him, there was laughter instead of negotiation, presence instead of pressure. Their time together was marked by simplicity. Dinners, conversations, shared quiet, moments that didn't demand definition. But simplicity has its limits. As their connection deepened, the differences became clearer. Barbra lived in a world of planning, legacy, and consequence. Don lived in the moment, guided by instinct rather than intention. "He was free in a way I wasn't," she later reflected, "and I didn't want to cage that." What felt refreshing at first slowly revealed a gap in readiness. She was thinking about permanence. He was still discovering himself. There was no dramatic ending, no betrayal or public fracture. The relationship faded naturally, as some are meant to. Looking back, Barbra spoke of Don with warmth, never regret. He wasn't a lesson in loss, but a reminder that timing matters as much as feeling. "Sometimes love arrives," she said, "before two people are ready to build the same future." Don Johnson symbolized a life of ease and possibility. A life lived without urgency or expectation. One she enjoyed briefly, but could never fully enter without abandoning the woman she had become. He wasn't the wrong man. He was simply a man from a different season of her life. Number 5. Andre Agassi. When Barbra Streisand met Andre Agassi, the connection surprised them both. It happened in the early 1990s, at a moment when Barbra was firmly established, confident, reflective, and no longer chasing approval. Andre, on the other hand, was still in motion, a global sports icon grappling with fame, expectation, and a restless inner life. On paper, they seemed mismatched. In person, the difference intrigued her. Andre was intense in a quieter way than the men who came before him. Disciplined, thoughtful, and surprisingly vulnerable, he spoke openly about pressure and self-doubt. Barbra admired that honesty. He was very young, she later acknowledged, but he was also very deep. With him, conversations drifted toward identity, how success can both elevate and isolate, how public applause often hides private confusion. There was affection, curiosity, even tenderness. But beneath it all lived an unavoidable truth. They were standing at opposite ends of experience. Barbra had already survived fame's sharpest edges. Andre was still bleeding from them. I had already asked my big questions, she reflected. He was just beginning to ask his. A life together would have required imbalance. Barbra would have become the anchor. Andre, the one still searching. And she knew, instinctively, that love should not feel like instruction. I didn't want to be a teacher, she once implied. I wanted to be a partner. They parted gently, without drama or resentment. Looking back, Barbra spoke of Andre with respect and fondness, not longing. He represented a version of love that was sincere but unfinished, a connection meaningful in its moment, yet not meant to stretch across a lifetime. Andre Agassi wasn't a mistake. He was a reminder that emotional readiness matters as much as emotional connection. Sometimes love arrives honestly, just not equally. Number 6. Ryan O'Neal. When Barbra Streisand spoke about Ryan O'Neal, her tone carried a rare mixture of affection and distance, the sound of something remembered clearly but kept carefully. Their paths crossed in the 1970s when Ryan was Hollywood's golden boy, charming, impulsive, and magnetically alive. He brought with him a warmth that felt immediate, almost effortless. Ryan was easy to be with. He didn't analyze feelings. He lived inside them. Barbra found that refreshing after relationships shaped by control, intellect, or imbalance. He was very open, she once reflected. What you saw was what you got. With him, love didn't feel negotiated. It simply happened. Quickly, naturally, without overthinking. But ease can hide fragility. As time passed, Barbra began to sense the limits of what Ryan could sustain. His life was marked by emotional turbulence, unresolved wounds, complicated family ties, and a tendency to avoid stillness. Where Barbra had learned to sit with solitude, Ryan resisted it. I needed stability, she later admitted. He needed escape. Their rhythms never fully aligned. There was no single moment that ended what they shared. Instead, understanding arrived quietly. A life together would have required Barbra to absorb chaos she had already worked hard to leave behind. I knew who I was by then, she said, and I knew what I couldn't carry anymore. Love alone, she realized, was not enough to build a future. Looking back, she never diminished what they had. Ryan represented a version of love that was warm, sincere, and emotionally real, but ultimately unsustainable. He wasn't a lesson in heartbreak, but in self-preservation. Ryan O'Neal wasn't the man she settled down with. He was the man who reminded her that tenderness must be matched by steadiness. And sometimes, choosing yourself is the most loving decision of all. At 83, Barbra Streisand does not speak of love with regret. She speaks of it with understanding. Each man she reflected on represented a different life. Partnership, intensity, freedom, tenderness, ambition, calm. None were mistakes. Each revealed something essential about who she was becoming. What ties these stories together is not loss, but clarity. Barbra learned that love is not measured by permanence, but by truth. The truth of who we are and what we are willing to give without